Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for the segment, we have Ryan Steelberg, CEO of Nasdaq-listed Veritone, Phillip Shoemaker, Executive Director of Identity.com, and Carm Taglienti, Chief Data Officer of Insight. They join us to discuss building the right foundation for AI, as well as building a modern, ethical platform. It is great to have all of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks, and we'll quickly go around the horn here. Ryan, let's start with you. Give us a brief overview of Veritone and where you sit within the AI space.
Yeah, we're a 9-year-old company, started in 2014, focused really on the enterprise AI software applications and services provider. So think of us as kind of the operating system that sits on top of the hyperscalers like Azure or even on-prem, but the Azure, AWSs and the like. So in terms of the stack, we're really focused on the software application side in the AI ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And Phillip, tell us about the work you're doing at Identity.com.
Yeah, we started in 2018. Identity.com is a nonprofit focused on creating identities for people in the real world. And this includes a lot of things that are being usurped by AIs, including synthetic identities.
And Carm, what about Insight?
So at Insight, we've been around for about 35 years. And so we were known in the data center. Our legacy heritage came from the data center, but we've grew quickly into technology consulting. So we're a global solutions integrator. And so we work with the cloud and we also work on-prem in order to be able to deliver solutions for customers, especially in the AI space and a variety of other areas.
Okay. And Ryan, let's talk about the work more in detail with Veritone. What problems are you looking to solve?
So we have about 3,500 customers in really three primary verticals. We're agnostic, but the three areas we're known at is for media and entertainment, the public sector, and the HR hiring areas. And really what we're very good at is helping organizations in effect ingest, index, and organize part A of their data assets to prepare them for taking advantage of both cognitive and now generative AI capabilities. And our core operating system, AIware, is a platform and a framework to allow companies like ESPN and the Masters Golf Tournament and the Department of Justice to have a common AI-based stack for them, again, to manage, stand up, organize their data sets, but also allows them to build intelligent AI-based workflows to solve real world problems. Efficiency gain, or I'd say, providing superhuman leverage to their staff is something that we're going to talk a lot about here on this call, but is something that our solutions help deploy. Very simply is in the world of public safety, we help do like audio and video intelligence or analysis very, very quickly. In media and entertainment, we help these large media brands ingest, organize their petabytes of audio and video data, and we do it to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of hours of processing each day.
Right. And well, Carm, this is a perfect segue for you because you note that PCs are cool again with all this processing. That makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And I think that in a lot of ways, I think as a solutions integrator, we're really looking at what are the mechanisms by which organizations can take advantage of these new capabilities. And, as of a year ago, we've had a huge disruption, right, as it related to AI. And now we're looking at things that are related to how do we make that data accessible, available, or actionable within the organization. And a lot of companies are really struggling with the fact, how do we use this? How do we take advantage of it? And then do I have to modernize every aspect of my application environment in order to be able to take advantage of it? And so those are some areas I think that we focus in today, and providing that leadership and guiding organizations in order to be able to do that, I think is really something we're all trying to do, and to really just take advantage of this disruption within the industry.
Well, Phil, the natural question here is who owns this content at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And one of the things that Identity.com is focused on is protecting the user and protecting this data, right? We started out as being an electronic KYC company to definitively identify yourself online without giving away too much information. But beyond that, when we see training data go into these big AI systems, you want to know where that data came from. And we provide mechanisms to attribute that data to an individual, to a company, to a segment, et cetera. But beyond that, all the data and images and content that's being generated, you want to make sure that, one, it's identified as AI content that is generated. Was it actually a picture of the Pope wearing Balenciaga? And at the same time, I don't want my likeness. I want to be able to protect our customers. So we guarantee that my likeness or my voice isn't used in these AI deepfakes.
Right. And that really is a concern around AI. We know some of the capabilities of what it has from a technical perspective, but as far as Veritone is concerned, what guardrails do you have in place to make sure that AI technology is being used for good?
I think it's first, we're having to self-regulate a lot right now, right? I mean, and there's inconsistencies in terms of regulations and governance on a state-by-state and municipality basis. That being said, we really need to understand, the IP goals and ownership opportunities that our customers have. If we're talking about ESPN, who's producing original content, but includes kind of what Philip was talking about is individuals in there. We with these new art forms of generative AI, we have to look at and build solutions with our partners to not only protect their content assets. So if it's misappropriated content from the Masters golf tournament, right, that gets hacked and extended using AI and distributed over the web, it's our job to make sure we have a full index of the original source data files. So in working both autonomously and in conjunction with groups like YouTube, we can quickly identify, right, those misappropriated IP assets, video assets, and either take them down if that's the MO of like the Masters, or in other cases like ESPN, they just want to make sure they can tag it fast enough so they can participate in the revenue stream. I think the other transition for us has now gone down to the individual level, where I'm working with groups like big talent agencies like CAA and others, is they want to understand, how do we start protecting and monetizing, right, the name and likeness from a synthetic AI perspective, their talents' voices, right, their faces. So it's an exciting time, and I think Veritone has sort of established ourselves as kind of their wilderness guide as we're kind of migrating from cognitive AI to generative AI.
Right, and that really is the challenge for people who have exposure to AI or are producing content, isn't it, Philip, that there is no framework. And we're seeing in other jurisdictions, other regions where there is some framework for AI. What's the holdup here in the US, and how challenging does it make it? Because it's very subjective at this point. What I think is ethical, you may not think it is.
Yeah, look, this is a tough one because we loathe regulation, but at the same time, we desperately need it, right? If you look at a company like Apple that created the App Store, they built their own regulation and their own rules around that. That was what I did at Apple. And for me, that was a great model to do that, keep the governments out of it. But look, the AI industry is moving too fast. It's not one company, it's hundreds. We need a little oversight here to let Brussels or DC sit down and weigh in on some of the decisions and directions we're going. We think a little bit of regulation could go a long way.
Right. And of course, the challenge is too, and we see this in other areas outside of AI, you can't really regulate by enforcement if there's no guardrails in place, Carm. I think you would agree.
That's right. Yeah. And I think it's like Philip was saying, it's like if you don't put any guidelines in place, then it's really difficult to even start. It's an evolutionary kind of thing. So you have to make sure that you at least understand what are some of the minimalistic kinds of things that we might put in place in order to be able to control the environment. And I don't mean control in a bad way, but I think to some extent, the concept of provenance, where did data come from? How does data move into specific locations? Who's using it? Copyright protections, et cetera. Like all those things, we have to figure out like, how do we manage that? But at the same time, we're a capitalistic society. So how do we understand how to take advantage of that information to move faster? And we want to be creative, we want to be innovative, but it sometimes can be difficult. And it's always a bit of a catch-22 between being able to progress and innovate and also then to regulate. And so I think it's a tough dilemma to have to deal with. And the European Union tends to come up with better ways to do that. I don't know if it's because maybe they are just more sensible in terms of understanding what some of these things need to be and how to put enforcements in place. But I think we're just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're still grappling with the merits of Section 230, right? I mean, that's from the 90s, and I mean that just asks the basic question of who's responsible for that content, right? Whether you're a publisher or content creator. So now you factor in AI and all this data, and you start thinking about Web3 and these artificial environments. I mean, that's just layer upon layer.
That's right. Yeah, and it also has to do with like who puts a claim on it as well. Did you claim ownership for it, or is it copyrighted, and how do you copyright it? And we'll get all the way back to like digital copywriting and mechanisms like that. And I think we have the facilities in place. It's a matter of just using the enforcement mechanisms to be able to find it, detect it, use it.
Yeah. And Philip, do you see any progress on the regulatory front? Is this something that could potentially see some framework in 2024 post-election next year or two?
Yeah, I think as I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think we'll see coming out of Brussels in the EU first. It's the Brussels effect that we've seen so many times. And we're going to ultimately see it roll through the White House as well. So yeah, I see it happening in late 2024, early 2025. But I think one of the concerns we have here also is that we're talking for the good actors, right? That AI for the bad actors are going to just inundate us with content that we can't believe, that's untrustworthy, et cetera. And those are the ones that are going to be increasingly problematic that we have to squash. And how to squash that? Look, I think regulation can help to some extent, but going beyond that, we need a technology, a technical direction and a technical solution to these problems.
Yeah, I mean, you would say the same for the cybersecurity space, right? If it's certainly, the bad actors are leveraging it when it comes to cybersecurity and compliance, and it just makes it more challenging for companies. So I know we discussed this earlier, Adam, as it relates to Veritone, but how are you ensuring that security and compliance around those applications?
Well, I mean, it's part of an ecosystem, right? So you have to, a few people touched on this, is making sure we have the right safeties and controls and regulations and governance on our data assets and of our respective customers. But I think ultimately for a lot of our application use cases, we do service several hundred like police and sheriff departments that use our software every day, again, to prosecute cases. You have to be nimble and understand in certain jurisdictions that you can't use facial identification in context to an investigation, right, of a case. Across a county line, you can, right? So I think ultimately is for us as a business, we got to make sure that we have the modular structure and microservice setup of Veritone and AIware, so we can still exist and grow and thrive as a business, but be flexible enough that if one jurisdiction says, hey, it's okay to use AI for, I'd say post-analytical review of body camera data, but you can't use it in the context of a live investigation. For us as a business, we're still trying to advance and we still want to make money but be able to adhere to, which today for us in the United States is almost done down to the city by city level in certain instances. So I think ultimately you have to look at the entire workflow, right? The protection of the data assets, how the AI is going to be invoked. Some of it has a very low risk, very similar to what the EU standards were. They have basically generally 4 major categories, right? They've made it very clear that they don't want biometric real-time, right, AI-based processing of audio and video information at a minimum for, like, let's say public walkways in France, right, for example. But that's not the case. It's done on a much more fractured basis here in the United States. So again, us as businesses who are still trying to grow, we have to navigate, right, through what is guaranteed to be an ever evolving and changing rules and regulation structure. But again, it starts with classic best practices, right? Planning ahead. We're planning ahead that there is going to be regulation across the board. And so I think that from that perspective it's just making sure that we are sensitive to the fact of knowing what uses of AI are really crossing the line too much in terms of the zeitgeist of perception. But to be clear, there's still a lot of money to be made as organizations, for the other positive areas of applications of AI.
Yeah, Ryan, I think you summed that up very well. And Carm, I see you shaking your head in agreement there. I mean, it really has to be challenging to pivot in an environment like this where the technology is moving so fast. And you're also operating, many companies operate on a global basis where they have different restrictions that they have to adhere to. I mean, certainly some of the largest tech companies in the US, they have, massive operations in the EU as an example.
Yeah, I mean, it's expensive. I mean, for a lot of our, media customers internationally, those assets can't leave provenance, right? So in effect, we have to stand up multiple instances of Veritone, whether it's either commercial cloud or public cloud on Azure or AWS in different regions. And so again, I think, this has gotten a lot easier. It's been a lot easier, frankly, as AWS and Azure and others advance, and frankly, they adopt more strict, security and data protocols in their platforms. It's made it a lot easier for us over the last 10 years to grow with them and still adhere to these strict policies on a country by country basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will add to that, though, is, as we look at this, and I think you're right, is classical AI, I think, is really just a matter of policy and understanding the usage of the data, and you can actually enforce it. But generative AI is a little bit different because, the elephant in the room here is the large language model, right? So how was the data trained? What data went into it? Do we know all of the protections that should be provided against the data that may be in there? We don't. And it's also not a deterministic model. It's probabilistic. So you don't exactly know why it's generating what it is generating. So how do you regulate that? And so so it's really just this model of we have to figure that out first technically, and then be able to understand how to address each of the policy issues that you're describing as we think about the generative world. Did I use a fragment of image, for example, from something that was copyrighted, and then should I not be able to use that? Or did someone's face somehow make their way into an image that was generated? You have to be able to track that. And that's going to require a little bit of, technical prowess to be able to understand how exactly to do that.
And Philip, if you want to follow up.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the training data is one of the biggest issues that we have, for sure. I used to work at an AI startup that our lifeblood was the training data. And if you got bad data, you got a bad output. And I think it was really interesting what Carm said is like, you're not really sure where this output came. It's probabilistic. If you ask the same question twice, you're going to get different answers. And it's confusing. It's confusing to many people. But imagine if you could ultimately ask the model, okay, you just spit out an image. Where did this come from? And it could reference so many different sources there. I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad, but we'd probably see 30 or 40 different references there. But to me, this is the future. This is what we ultimately need to do.
Yeah, I'll just one comment on that. I mean, the blankets position that a lot of our media customers are adhering to is, they're putting out bold statements for updating their T's and C's for any and all third parties, right? That they quote unquote deem this IP coverage to absolutely cover their data assets as protected, even in the context of training data. Media monitoring, there's so many different historical laws, right, that kind of make this a little blurry. And obviously the art form, the classic thing is, how derivative of a piece of art makes it new and novel, thus, that can be deemed as completely new and novel from the original art. So this is going to unfortunately be very, very messy, and it's not going to be easy fix. What we're all talking about here. So it's really just, for us is, for on a customer by customer basis, what's their journey look like? But to be very clear, they know for a fact that a lot of their, copyrighted content, whether it's the voices of Walter Cronkite or his faces or actors and actresses or scenes, they all know that so much of this has already been harvested and frankly, a lot of these models were taking advantage of those things. But I think it's ultimately is the transition of looking forward, and making sure. And by the way, we're seeing Anthropic and others run around the world, and meeting with everybody to try and make sure, because they know the war is coming. Reminds me so much of the Digital Copyright Act and the fight between Viacom and YouTube, just